Thank you for the reminder about recording. We're now officially recording for the second part of our full stack app lecture. We kind of sketched out the features that we want to build, and Icarus, that was a great feature request for some sort of auto logout behavior. And I think I now want to switch. I probably don't need README and notes because I feel like I'm going to end up doing a lot in each of them. So I may get rid of the notes file. Your feature request is a great one. I think I am going to start like refactoring our feature list and build it in. And in fact, in a lot of ways, I think a better way to break this up is not sort of front end and back end, but each feature, and then look at what's involved on the front end and back end for each. And for instance, your feature request for that step one is set timeout on that authentication token or cookie, right? And step two is on the front end, gracefully handle if the authentication token cookie is invalid or timed out. And so I think I'm actually going to quickly refactor this into a bit of an easier like set of features to work with. Like we want login, we want sign up, we want homepage, and we want, let's call it user authentic, let's call it session timeout. And I think those are the main features. And here we can break it up a bit easier because on the back end, we'll need a route. We'll need the user model we'll need everywhere. So let's see here. So if we get there, we will implement the session timeout. But just even, I think sort of walking through and thinking through what's involved with that as these two separate steps is useful, because it might make perfect sense. Like we just get it working on the back end, and if it's looks ugly on the front end and it's not a nice user experience, we still have a valid feature. And then this next add-on to that is having the front end do something a bit more graceful if that logs out. Like automatically logging you out of the homepage, that might require a bit of extra work, right? But we could at least make sure that the next time you want to do something, you're doing it with a session cookie that has timed out, essentially. And I think I'm going to add user accounts as a feature, because we're going to need to have the Django user model. And then we're going to want to set up Django auth for the user model. And really having a database is also a feature. I'm sort of using Django as my shorthand for everything on the back end and React on everything for the front end. What questions do people have? And are there other feature requests or feedback that people have? Okay, awesome. Let's do this. So first off, I'm going to start with getting the React app going because that's an area that I'm familiar with. And as yesterday, I'll just name it the client, and it's going to be React. And that's really all I need to do. I do want to follow the steps here that they listed. Yesterday, I forgot to run npm install, so I don't want to make that mistake again. And I am just going to, for a sanity check, make sure that this is all working. Yep, and this looks great. And in fact, I guess as a feature set, we also really need to add host React app with Django, right? We just don't want to use the dev server. And that's really what we covered yesterday. And now is a good time for me in my project. And can everyone see my screen okay? Awesome. Thank you. Now is a good time for me to add this to Git. And now I can go back into my project directory to continue work. And now I have a nice clean commit just with that one bit of work. And here there's a git ignore file set up already. So node modules is ignored and not checked into version control, which is what we want. Next, I'm going to set up the server application. And I never can remember command line commands, and that's why I use Control R because it will search through my command history as I type. I sort of remembered it, so I got about this far. And I probably need to create my virtual environment, so that would be a good thing to do instead. So let's do this, except I remember Zainab said the other day, if we name the virtual environment directory .venv, VS Code actually likes that, and I think we'll treat that as the default Python environment. So let's give that a shot. So a directory name with a dot in front is a normal directory just by default. The shell, and when you look at stuff in the Finder or in the Windows equivalent of the Finder, it doesn't show you directories whose names start with a dot. On the command line, the -a flag to the list command will show us that Python virtual environment. And I do want to create a git ignore file now in the root of my project because we don't want to check our Python virtual environment into version control. And I'm just making really small commits as we go. And I pushed, and now I'm ready to install Django. But I need to activate my virtual environment first. And my computer seems to be taking a long time to do this. So we'll give it a second. And then if it doesn't figure it out, perfect. And I can see here.
Quick question. Sorry. I was curious. So you're just doing your virtual environment right now. Is it okay to do your install for npm and all that in your virtual, or would you like to have that outside your virtual?
That's a great question. The Python virtual environment only affects Django and Python dependencies that we install. With JavaScript and npm, the node package manager, node being how we run JavaScript outside the browser on our own machines, it's totally unaffected by anything we do with the virtual environment. So they're kind of like completely parallel. For npm and node stuff, the way it works is this package.json file should live in the same directory as this node modules directory. And when you npm install stuff, it goes into the node modules directory. And when you use npm install, it should automatically add the dependency to package.json. And this package lock JSON gets even more specific with like very specific versions and which commit hash to grab from and things like that. So you can repeatedly install exactly the same version of each dependency. But you can't, like, whatever I do with my virtual environment won't affect any of that stuff. Yeah, that's a great question. The Python virtual environment is really just some fancy stuff that happens in the shell. I mentioned this a little bit yesterday, but it bears repeating. Really, the main thing the virtual environment does is it adds this path to my shell environment's path variable, so that when I'm running Python, the shell will look at that path and look for Python in that virtual environment directory, or when we do stuff with Django, it looks in that virtual environment directory. It's not like a virtual machine like WSL2 or stuff with Docker or stuff with hypervisor or whatever. Virtual environment is a little bit of a confusing name in that regard. And speaking of the virtual environment, I am now going to install Django. And I'm also going to install PsychoPG2 because we'll want to use that at some point for Postgres. And I probably misspelled it. Though I feel like that spelling looks right.
No, the first spelling, the Y and the S are flipped. You have it correct now, though.
Oh, thank you. That is, yeah. I would have spent 10 minutes and not realized I had misspelled it the first time or seen what I missed. Thank you, Kevin. And then we also want to install the Django REST framework. And again, I'm using that Control-R to find the name. The other advantage of that is avoiding spelling mistakes, which is all too easy to do. And we'll see how much of Django REST framework we use, but at least we have our dependencies installed now, which is great. And I think what I'm going to do is also put our dependencies in a requirements.txt, which I'll probably put in the server directory when I make that in a minute.
Adam, quick question. Is the React server still up and running right now, or did you have to exit out of that in order to get your Django stuff running?
Great question. I did exit out of that. It does not affect anything. You could just open another terminal tab or another terminal window, leave it running, and do everything else with Django. The React dev server that Vite runs for us is like its own little tiny web server, and it's its own program running. So it doesn't interact with Django or the Python stuff that we're doing in any way, shape, or form. And in fact, like a very common development workflow is to use the dev server for your front end app for hot module reloading, and then use Django as sort of the REST API for your front end app, though that's not what we're going to see today. And in the server directory, I think I'm just going to run this pip freeze command, which prints out our dependencies, right? And use the pipe command from the shell to put that into a requirements.txt file. And now that lives in the server directory, so I know where that is. And I'm in the root directory of my project, and I'm just going to add this stuff to Git. And push, which is great. And now I think I will use this notes file. And I think what I'll use it for is like implementation construction steps, because there's a lot of setup, right? There's a lot of setup. We have to do a lot of Django configuration now. And can someone maybe just walk me through the things that we are going to have to configure with Django, both for Psycho PG2 to connect it with React like we did yesterday? And if we get to some of the stuff with the auth model right now, we can throw that in our to-do list as well.
You need to create a database first of all, and then you're going to go into settings.py, and you need to change what database you're using to Postgres, and then tell it which database to use.
Yeah, totally. Set the database to Postgres in settings.py, set DB name in settings.py. I know some of the WSO folks have to add a bit more information as well. Yeah, thank you. And I know someone else is going to mention something else as well.
We have to add a REST framework to installed apps.
Yep, totally. And let me get back in my editor there. Add Django REST framework to installed apps. And what else? That's a pretty... Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Set up your static files.
Yeah, totally. We're going to have to set up our static file directory. We'll have to create the static directory. And then we'll also have to set static directory path in settings.py, I think. And that's actually a pretty good start. So I think I'm just going to start running down this to-do list. Excuse me, and doing this stuff. The database, I'm going to wait a little bit to do, just because I want to do a recap of what we did yesterday. And at some point, we'll also want to run the migrations with the database. So let's go ahead and set up the static directory stuff. And to be completely honest, I am just going to look at the code in demos and nodes from yesterday. Excuse me.
Hey, Adam, do we still need to install Markdown? For the rest?
That's a great question. I did install that yesterday. Django REST framework says you do. I don't know if we're going to use it or not. So let's say no. And then if we run into a problem, we'll install it.
Okay.
That's a great point. I think what that's for is for like API documentation. Once you write out your REST API, there is probably some fancy stuff that's done with that Markdown library to like create a little website that is also your API documentation and auto-generate some of that. Kayla, yes.
So are we going to be creating a Django app today too, since we have to work with the models and whatnot?
Yes, totally. That's a good call. I know we didn't do that yesterday, and we'll do that today as well. And I should add that somewhere on the to-do list. Excuse me. Probably right here, because that might affect our paths to different things, right? I don't think it will, but it might. So this is a great list. I'm actually just going to start at the top. Let's add the Django REST framework to installed apps. And Control F or Command F is what we use there to search through VS Code. And that's done. And I might need a little help with creating a Django app again.
So Python -m,
Thank you.
Django, start app. So it's
Start
the same
app.
as start project, but yeah, start app and then name
Got
the
it.
app.
Thank you so much.
Of course, of course.
Awesome. And we haven't really decided what we're going to build. Any requests? Any you know, it's going to be some sort of CRUD type site. Anything fun that we should aim for that people are excited about? We could do the pet shop, restaurant, something else.
You do a database that tracks whether or not users like eggnog, pineapple, and something else. What else is controversial? Grits.
Pumpkin spice.
I love it.
And we
I
can
love
just
it.
fill it with the classmates, so that way we've got a good running list of who's on what side, so we know when we're doing group projects, we know who to group up with.
Controversial foods. Is that, how do people
love
feel
it.
about that name? All right,
I
let's
think
do
it's
it.
great.
Thank you. It is long. That is the one I honestly would, in a work situation, I would have come up with something shorter because we're all going to misspell controversial so many times, but it is a great name. So I'm going to stick with it. So I've created the app. I've got it there. Let me go back to my notes. So this is done. Now we have to add to settings.py. We have to set up the URLs route. Is there anything else with like the app setup that I'm missing here, just to get the sort of basics going?
Did we add the app to installed apps yet?
No, we haven't. That's what I have here. I just set it in a different way.
We haven't talked about views at all yet, have we? I know that's part of URLs, but
We haven't talked about views. I don't think we're there yet. Right now, I'm more doing the things that we are going to definitely need to create a hello world view. I just kind of want to set up all the plumbing that connects all the pieces before we start doing that work of building views and stuff. So now we've got it added to installed apps. And now in URLs, PY, we want to, let's see here. We need to create our URLs PY here, I believe. I think I'm just going to copy this whole file and put it here. And then get rid of the things that we don't need. We don't need admin here. And Icarus, we might get exactly to what you were saying right now, because we're going to want some sort of view page right here, just to even get this started. And we're going to want to do an import as well. So from dot import views. And oh, it doesn't like it being above the doc string. And this view method doesn't exist yet. So let's go ahead and create that. And I'm going to have the view just do something very simple. I don't actually remember, let's see, looking at this, an HTTP response object with the string as content.
You can just put a
So-
placeholder string, right?
I
Yeah.
Like,
think-
hello?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
you
you.
can put a string or an HTML element.
Oh, perfect. We'll just do this. And I think, yeah, a lot of these errors, by the way, these squigglies, Python wants to see this special kind of documentation called a doc string. Though I guess it didn't make those go away. Which is
I think
okay.
you need,
And
yeah, I think you need a special Django extension or something like that.
I might, okay,
Yeah,
that's okay.
they're fine
We're
though.
not-
It's not, yeah, they're not errors.
Yeah, I should, it's not best practice. So I do apologize about that, folks, but just to get the ball rolling, if nothing else, it's good. Here though, at least for those errors, I realize the doc string makes them go away. It is, we should get better about like, it is good practice to not just have tons of squigglies that you're constantly ignoring in your editor, because you do actually want to use this to help you for when you make a mistake when programming. And I think for the personal projects, we'll try to make sure that we have like some good extensions and VS Code advice. But now we've got stuff that's real. And again, I think that's just VS Code being funny, and we'll test this out in a minute because we've written a view, we've written a route. Let me double check to make sure that my paths are set up correctly. And I think what I do need here is and I might need a little guidance on how to write this one out to point to our app.
You're gonna do a path and you're gonna need include up there on line 17. On line 17, right after path, just a comma include.
Got it. Oh,
And then you can just do an empty string.
and
No, sorry. So path and then just erase it. Yeah,
Yep.
there you go. And then in include, you'll do yeah, controversial food.urls.
got it. Thank you so much. Controversial foods /urls.py. Does that look right?
No, just you just need .urls only, no
Okay.
py.
Thank you. I see. Okay, it's the module. Got it. Right. This module and then that module. And then I need my comma. And I think we'll leave admin first. And now we should have enough to start this server and then be going. So let me go ahead and start this server up. I think at this point also I'm going to start making multiple terminals for things. So I'm in the server directory, Python and manage py on server. Let's see. There we go. Okay, So this is an error, but this is good because I can see that I have gotten as far as the index method in my view for controversial food. So that part is linked up. And if I had to guess, this was me trying to be too clever and not including a request in the argument for views because Django was complaining that we weren't doing anything with it. But it probably really needs that.
I think if you're using a linter, those squiggles can come from that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I am using a Python linter, and that's probably exactly what's doing it. So this is awesome. And just to recap, oh, well, we can't see the error message there, but I could see in that error message that it got into that views function. And so that's kind of how I knew that the positional argument missing was talking about the request. So as always, I like to commit stuff. So let's go ahead and commit things. I'm going to ignore this db SQLite3 file because I think Django started using SQLite, but we want to use Postgres. So that's probably what we should do next. And now I've added everything to Git. All these things are going to be added to a commit once I commit, except the SQLite file. And now let's set up Postgres. And I think what I'm going to do is open up another tab and just run pSQL. And I'm going to create a database named controversial foods. Awesome. So got that database. And let me actually go back to my to-do list here and we can start crossing stuff off. So that part's done. And let me open up the chat too. I need to pay more attention to the chat. Oh, we haven't gotten to the static directory stuff yet. That's a great question. I think we're going to do the database next because I'm seeing Django is wanting to do things with databases because it obviously did something with SQLite. So we might as well get Postgres set up so it's all going to where we want. So I've gone ahead and created the database. And really, this step should be named set up Postgres. And I'm going to have to set the DB name in settings.py and set our Django program to use Postgres. So let's do that right now. So I believe the name we just changed to controversial foods. So dangerous. Great name, but such a terrible name for programming because it's always going to be misspelled, but too good to resist. And then I believe PostgreSQL. Does that look correct to folks? Can I get a quick sanity check there, please?
No, I think you got to undo, and it's just where it says SQLite is where you put Postgres? Question mark?
Yes. The PostgreSQL part was correct, but yeah, you need to add it instead of the SQLite 3.
After the dot. On line 80.
Got it. Database DB backends. Thank you so much.
And then the name was the name that you wrote before.
Got it. Thank you so much. So fingers crossed, that should do it. And I'm going to kill and restart the server. And that's going to be my first test to make sure that I didn't do anything silly in the settings.py. And I think the next step is we probably want to run a migration to get everything set. I do remember that like running a migration and then changing the auth user model and then running a migration again caused some problems. So I think we probably should set that stuff up again, or set that stuff up for the user model and authentication before we run any migrations. And I just could also use a sanity check there with the class. Does that make sense to folks, and does that sound right?
Yeah, I think you have to set up your models first.
Yeah, let's do it. So I am going to add, I'm going to commit to Git. We are now using Postgres, which is great. And on our task list, we've got that done. We've got that done. And this actually doesn't really go here because we want to wait until after Postgres is set up and our user auth model is set up. So next we want to set up the user auth model in Django. I know that in settings.py, we're going to have to specify model name for the special user model. Can someone maybe remind me of the other steps involved here? And this one I know was a little while ago, but I'm just curious if anyone can maybe throw one or two things out just to get us going.
Are we using a custom user model or just the regular model?
Great question. I think we're going to use a custom user model.
Okay, so then we'd have to go back into our settings.py and add the model that we create to our auth underscore user underscore model.
Yeah, totally. And let's see. I was using different words, but I have that here as the same task, and you're totally right. And we should, in fact, we should create the user model first before we worry about settings.py. And thank you. Yeah, in fact, set auth user model. Yeah, Kayla and Benjamin, Ben, thank you. And in fact, I'm just going to go ahead and do that because Ben pasted that code in the chat, which is amazing. And I really appreciate that. And I will add that down here, or maybe just somewhere near auth, something else auth related. I'm just going to put it at the bottom. I don't think it makes a dramatic difference. And I am going to do a quick, like if I haven't looked at something in a minute, I always like to do a quick look at the docs. Just to confirm that everything is what I think it is. Like if instead of Ben sharing that code with me, I had found that code on Stack Overflow, I would use it, but then very quickly look at the docs to make sure that Stack Overflow didn't make a mistake, because sometimes that happens. Ben, I know you have that. That was more just for teaching purposes.
Sure. Yeah, app user will just have to be the name of your class in your models, though, because it has the .app user.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's
a different name.
Sorry.
But you can change it if you want to make the class a different name.
Yeah, I think that's a perfectly fine name. Unless anyone has strong preferences or suggestions for the username. It's simple. We understand what it is. We have guide code that uses it. And in fact, I'm looking at the guide code from our lesson the other day to build that out. And so I'm going to go ahead and build that out right now. And as I do that, I'll talk about it just as a refresher, because I know we haven't looked at this in a minute. So just to remind everyone, Django has a lot of built-in functionality for user accounts and authentication, because that's such a core feature for websites. So those squigglies are killing me. And that's what we're leveraging. There is an abstract user class that we can use, that we can inherit into our own user class. And that's exactly what we're going to do here. And I'm not going to worry too much about the different fields. I will add an email field. You don't really need the verbose name property. In fact, I'll just get rid of it because we don't need it. And the email field does need to be unique. That's the big thing. And then kind of the important thing here to do is set this special class property username field to tell it what field is being used as the username when we log in. Though I remember that didn't quite work as well as we'd hoped. And then we don't really need to add any required fields there. And just as a reminder, this abstract user class gives us a lot, including the password field, which is why I don't have to include that here. And this is where the Django docs, I think, are very friendly and useful. So we've got that working. I could use a sanity check if this model looks good for like a world's simplest user account, or if there's anything that I'm missing. Okay, cool. So now we can test it out. And I think the simplest way to test it out, first off, is let me restart the app. We'll probably see the same error. Yep. So I know most of you know this. Just to repeat, as always, with error messages, you start at the bottom. And here it says value error, dependency on app with no migrations, controversial foods. So what do we think we need to do to solve this error?
Make them.
Migrate.
Yeah, exactly. Run the migrations. Best kind of problem to have. Python, and I totally admit I need to Google this.
It's just manage.py, make migrations.
Thank you so much. Python manage.py, make migrations. Let me make sure I'm in the right directory. Perfect. It is a little confusing having two server directories inside each other, but we will make do. Awesome. So that was created, and then I probably want to run Python manage.py migrate, which I believe will apply the migrations. So, and just as a reminder, that make migration step went ahead and created this Python file that's a migration file. That is a Python program using psychopg2 to talk to Postgres, telling it all the fields that we want to create. And here we can see everything that it's doing for us for app user. So it's doing a lot, which is great. There's a username field, a first name, a last name field. Hopefully these won't be required fields. I kind of remember running into that before. And all sorts of properties about this. And then psychopg2 does the work of creating the actual table in Postgres. Which I just want to point out, by the way, how far we've come in this class, because now this is like our review, when like about 2 weeks ago, this was, you know, we were just learning this stuff. So you folks are awesome. So we run that migration. And now if I go into Postgres and I connect to, in fact, let me step back a bit. I think it's /L for list, to list all the databases in my database server. And let's connect to the controversial foods database. And now let's list, maybe is it DT to describe tables? Maybe is it DT controversial foods app user? And I always forget the correct command, but there is a command to, there we go, /D to describe that table. And here we can see that table in our database that PsychoPG2 just created. And
Adam,
this,
I had a
by the way,
quick question.
yeah, absolutely.
So sorry to interrupt you in the middle of that.
No.
And this may end up being an open-ended question here, but when we made these migrations, you mentioned hopefully some of this stuff isn't a required field. So if you look at like is staff or I don't know, groups, if we wanted to change any of this, and because Django, you know, just made this for us, is it even possible to delete some of those fields, or do we have to go into post screen and maybe drop some of those? And if so, would we have to make the migrations again?
Great question. That is a great question. We would have to make migrations again. That's the short answer. Let me commit this code, and then let's actually do that with app users and see that. I think that would be a great thing for us to see actually with the migration tool.
All right, cool.
Totally. And I'm sorry that I didn't see your hand up there. Great question. Great idea. So very quickly, just to share kind of like my philosophy on commits, migrations are so valuable and important that I think it makes sense to keep them in their own commit. I guess alternatively, we could put all of these together because they all are sort of the same thing. So it's not, honestly, it's not the end of the world. What I am going to do is delete this DB SQLite file because that's using the SQLite 3 database that Django has by default, and we don't care about that. And I'm going to be very careful, speaking of the pizza story, in typing out the file I want to delete. And then I'm going to use the dot command to add all those files. I'm going to commit created app user model and migration. And now we have one commit with all of those steps, which is great. Yeah, and Kenneth, to go to your question, let's say we want to change something about app user. Let's say we want to make, we were talking about controversial foods. Let's add, let's see, was your question about making a change in general or changing one of these fields that the migration sort of creates for us?
The second one there. So like is staff, for instance, if my concern is not wanting that to be a required field in my database or my program, could I just delete that line, like line 28, for example, and then run the migration again?
Got it.
Would it be that simple?
Got it. Got it. That's a great question. You want to do it a different way. You never want to touch the migration file. Think about that. Basically, any file that we do not write that is generated by something else, we usually don't want to touch it. There are obviously exceptions, like, you know, the npm create v Django start project creates tons of stuff, but migration files are not meant to be directly modified. We want a sort of immutable, unchangeable history. And the way we change stuff is we change the model, run the make migrations command, and that creates a new migration that would just undo or change the thing that we want to change. So I'm going to use like is active as an example, because I don't want to mess with the admin stuff. Let's have, yeah, let's see, ID, password.
Could we change the email field? Because we have defined that as our username as well. So we have two of them now.
Yeah, so we could change the email field. Django's a little funny with the username field. Even though this is there, we have also told Django essentially to treat email like the username field. I think a good example would be, let's set is active to false. And I'm a little trepidatious about this one just because I want to make sure that we don't make our life harder. But I think that's okay because we will just have to add activating the user as a step. And actually, Django set is active false default. I'm going to double check how to do this because I think I know, but I'm not 100%. So, and in fact, I need to Django model user is active false. I think I didn't have model in my search, and that's why I wasn't seeing some of the results that I want. I'm pretty sure I know what happens that we can just overwrite, but I always kind of like double checking stuff. So I'm going to do a quick look. And then if we don't see anything, we might take a different tack. Yeah, and we haven't really talked about is active. Here we go. This is more what I want. Let's see what they're doing here. By clicking on which profile becomes active. You cannot simply add a models methods to a template. You'll need to write a view for that. Yeah, this is a little different.
What are we trying to do?
I want
Just have a
to,
default setting?
yeah, I want to change the value. So we get this is active.
You can just override it. You can just say is active equals false or equals true. Yeah.
Oh,
I
just
think
right
that should
there.
work. I think so.
That is great. I was making this way more complicated than it needed to be.
Because like the email exists too. But when we said email on line 9, that overwrites it. I think email was existing before.
I think you're totally right. Email was existing before. I was worried, like, do we have to do the whole models Boolean field thing here?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, that's awesome. So basically Psycho PG2 is like really smart and does the rest
Oh,
of that work for us.
Actually,
Maybe.
you might have to. You might.
Yeah. Yeah, it gets a little funny.
Models.boolean. Can you just copy what they have? So models.boolean field.
Yeah, that's the thing we never want to do. That was the other thought I had to be honest, was copying. And kind of, so this does go to your question. It does get tricky. That's the wrong one. When we start working with like a lot of Django's built-in behavior, it can start to get a little tricky. Because then we have to understand what it's doing. But honestly, it's not doing that much. Like, it's just a Boolean field.
Yeah, so the default, you'll just change the
Yeah,
value.
with an extremely long help text argument. Yeah, Zainab, thank you. I think that's the way to go.
And I only brought that up because not every project that we ever work on is going to be so clear cut and dry. So the fact that we can just essentially override what they have in our own models.py answers what I was asking exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of
and you,
people, oh, sorry.
no, go ahead, please.
Because I was looking something up about can we change the default model, and a lot of people on Stack Overflow are saying that you can kind of repurpose them. So I don't know if you can rename them, but you can use it for something else, and that's typically what people have been doing.
Do you mean with like a different approach than we do here?
No, like you're doing here. So we're just making it, I mean, here we're setting is active to false versus true or something like that. So we are technically changing it. So just kind of making them fit whatever context you have.
Got it. Yeah, totally. Yeah, and that is, you're totally right. That's exactly what we did with email. I got a little lost in the weeds there. But this is good to see, and it'll be good for us to run this migration and see how that works, because we haven't, I think, done a lot of model modification, and that is something you folks will be doing. And it's a great question about how to do this. You definitely don't want to modify the migration file that is generated. First, because that means like if we need to go back in time, like we can't reproduce the database, or if we want to build this on a new machine. But second, because it just gets too complicated and easy to mess stuff up. And the way these tools are designed is we don't modify a migration file, we change the model, run the migration tool, and that creates a new migration that changes the stuff that we want. And then this will change the database table as well. And I'm going to double check. I did not modify the migration file. I did not, which is great. And someone had a good question about what does the isActive property do? And we haven't talked about it a lot. I would have to double check the Django docs, but I'm pretty sure, like what this is for is, imagine you sign up and you get an email and you need to validate your email before you can log in. Well, the user account has been created, but it's not active until you validate your email. Or if we're getting rid of a user account, but we want to save that user's information for historical purposes, instead of deleting that row from the user table in the database, we just mark their account as inactive. So now let's see how this works. So let's run make migrations. And I have an error. Oh, because I did the wrong app. It should be manage py make migrations controversial foods.
I think you're in the wrong directory.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I totally am. That is the other risk of all this stuff. In fact, let me change the color here. No changes detected. Did I save this file?
Wouldn't it be no changes because the default is it's set back to true?
Oh, thank you so much. You're totally right, Kayla. We didn't change anything. Let's try that again. Awesome. And let's see what this does. So this generated a new migration file. And this is like a very long Python-y way of, if you remember when we looked at SQL, there was that like alter command, something like alter table, something. Then this is essentially going to be doing that in SQL. And in fact, there's a command to see exactly what this migration does. So Kenneth, that's the answer. Instead of modifying this file, we create another migration file that's going to make the change to the database. And I believe, let me do a quick search. Django migrate SQL preview. So this SQL migrate command will actually show us the SQL that the migration statement will run. And I think this would be a great one to check that out on. So here, let's do Python manage.py SQL migrate controversial foods. And then the migration number is 0002. So it's extremely short. I'm surprised there's not a bit more, because I would expect it to say like false or something like that. But I feel like we made our model change correctly. So I'm going to, oh, I probably need to make migrations again. That actually might be, no, I did that. Let's double check. Yeah, interesting. Let's see here.
Is it SQL since we're using Postgres now?
It is. Postgres uses the SQL, the standard query language. Postgres is just the shorthand name for we use for the database. Most relational databases like MySQL and Postgres are using SQL. I think this is correct. I also, this has been really good, but I also know that it's been a bit of a rabbit hole. So I think I want to run the migration, make sure the code is working. Maybe we'll do one or two more things, and then we'll take a break and come back to setting up the user accounts and connecting it to React. So I'm going to go ahead and run that migration. We don't have any users. I'm not too worried about that migration. I would like to see exactly where that change was made, but we more or less went through the process. And I do want to add these commits. And let's push that up. And let's step back and jump back to our task list and see where we are. And maybe we do one more thing and then we can take a break. Yeah, and that, okay, good. Just wanted to make sure I hadn't accidentally messed with anything. And I think we should run the server and double check that it's all working. Yep, which is great. And let's see where we were. So we've created the custom user model, and in settings.py, we've set that. So that part is great. And we've run these migrations. And next is setting up the static directory and connecting React and Django. We have been going for a while, so I'm thinking maybe we take a 10-minute break and then come back. How does that sound to folks? Let's do it. Let's take 10, and then we will keep going, connect React to Django, and set up some proper user accounts and login, which will be awesome. Yeah, Ben, thank you. That's exactly what we're doing next. And I think I might just do a little prep work for that during the break. Have a good break, everyone, and see you all in 10. And Icarus, I love that. Are we getting people's least favorite foods? That's amazing. Yeah, please fill out the controversial foods form during the break.
Yeah, I just dropped a Google Doc link that should be able to take all the responses. So
Awesome. I love it.